there were unmarked vehicles full of individuals that have not been explained. Is that right?
A ghost vehicle in law enforcement is not an uncommon reference. It's a vehicle that's been purposefully concealed to whereby it's not easy to identify. So no license plates, been painted over from its original cover. In this case, these two buses were totally painted white, like a cheap, fast overspray over all of the markings. So when you have two charter buses show up, the very first buses to show up in Union Station on January 6th.
Around 5 a.m.?
Around 5 a.m. The initial witness, another charter bus owner, arrived at 5:20. He thought he would be the first to arrive because he knew the schedule of all the other charter buses, and he knew that most of the buses would begin arriving around 6. So this charter bus operator was a very experienced man, very squared away. When he arrived with his couple of buses, these two white buses were, to his surprise, already there. And he immediately noticed that these buses were odd because they were totally painted over. It was a bad paint job. There was no markings, no phone numbers, no company name, totally outside the parameters of the way charter buses are required to operate by law. So he said, these buses are weird. And no one was getting out. So something else that happens within that charter bus driver community is the drivers know each other. And the passengers may stay on the bus if they're especially in a parking lot, they're not ready to disembark yet.
Sure.
The passengers might stay on the bus, but the bus drivers get off. And they talk to each other. They talk to the other bus drivers. So there are things that happen normally that the absence of that happening was odd. So he was suspicious enough of these buses as a professional that he collected some digital evidence of those buses and then estimated with him and other eyewitnesses between 40 and 50 guys that they described as Trump supporters. They all disembarked from the bus and they gathered in front of the two buses and they had like some kind of discussion, a briefing, like the way a military leader would address his troops.
Yeah, they call it a huddle.
And then they together went to the escalators and up in the Union Station and were gone.
And they were all men?
They were all men in all the Trump regalia. These men were in really good shape. They made comments like, wow, these are real serious Trump supporters, these guys. And they said they all had elbow pads and knee pads, and they appeared like they had common equipment, but they were not in uniform. But they behaved in a uniform manner. And we intend to get all of that video evidence from Union Station, from the escalators, from the parking lot. We have other eyewitnesses. Much to the chagrin of everybody that was in those buses and everyone who commanded them to be there, we've identified one of those buses. And you know what that means? That means that's their ass, because a bus is a serial numbered vehicle. And in America, the change of ownership of a serial numbered vehicle is documented. So that means we can begin to trace from the original owner of that bus, where it was sold and who bought it, and then who it was leased to and where it disappeared. And then eventually those buses were removed from the Union Station, and we're going to document all of that.
So you believe that those buses held undercover officers, not informants, correct?
I feel very, very confident that everybody that was on those two buses were FBI assets. And I have a high degree of belief that they were actual FBI agents. And I'm sorry to say, ma'am, my objective conclusion is that senior officials at the FBI were deeply involved there. You had a combination of FBI confidential informants, either registered, unregistered, or a volunteer informant, or actual FBI agents, depending upon the group and how significant the group was. Like the agents inserted and say that in the Proud Boys groups that were going to come to D.C., those are most probably actual FBI agents. Whereas some, random Facebook group of patriots from Arizona or something was most likely an informant. So it would still fall under the umbrella of an FBI asset if they
Right.
were communicating with the FBI, data that they were harvesting and information that they were recording and delivering to the FBI, screenshots of text chats or actual recordings of phone calls, things like that they were delivering to the FBI. All part of the web of surveillance of the American people.
What have you seen? What can you tell us about it? I know you can't get ahead of everything. I know there's limitations on some of this, but can you tell us anything?
I can tell you that the FBI had established a formula in 2020 that they pursued with all their power and authority to infiltrate groups across the country of Americans that were essentially discussing online. They'd formed online groups
Like chat rooms?
like chat rooms,
Discord and
Facebook
Telegram.
pages, etc., to discuss their frustrations with COVID oppression. And so the FBI identified groups and infiltrated them, and with undercover operations that were very effective. And they began planting seeds of discord. If you track the text threads, which I've seen some of, again through evidence that I've been able to witness, but I cannot share publicly because it would be in violation of court orders from individuals.
But to be clear,
I've seen it.
this is video you've seen with your own eyes.
Yes, ma'am. Evidence that was in criminal cases.
Is this what it's based on? It's based on the digital evidence, what you have on camera, and supporting evidence for that? I mean, other kinds?
Yeah, eyewitness testimony, sworn testimony, affidavits, text messages, emails, and digital footage. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of people would say, Clay, you're a lawman, right? That's what we do. We infiltrate groups where we perceive there to be a threat or potential of crime being committed. We have undercover offices. We have undercover assets like informants. This is the bread and butter of law enforcement. What are you
They were the
complaining
criminals.
about?
They were the threat.
Based on what?
We were just Americans. We were Americans that were angry and we were enraged that our freedoms were being oppressed, and that FBI and the powers that had become corrupted, those bad actors within the federal government that had this authority, they said that these Americans, how dare those Americans challenge the oppression that we're putting upon them?
Can you share any of the messages yet that you have said you traced back to FBI undercovers inside these groups?
No, ma'am.
And these chats?
No, ma'am.
Will you share it when
Yes,
you
I
can?
will. The moment that I'm able to reveal that stuff, I will.
You said specifically that you saw that there were undercover police officers who were inside the Capitol before any of the protesters came in.
That's right.
How do you know that? And can you give us any sense of what that means?
I mean, if you clearly have men dressed as Trump